Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan Ennis Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, third part thereof for the 17th of July 2024. A lot of content to get through again. Geopolitics is a very busy domain. We have the RNC in America, Republican National Committee Convention, that is taking place, and there are policy ideas coming out of that pertaining to China and Ukraine that are relevant to today. We've got JD Vance's selection still in the news, so we'll be talking a little bit about that. Hopefully put some of those ideas to bed after this video, because I know you won't want me continually talking about that stuff, but there is new information coming out. So anyway, Ukraine will not be able to launch F-16 strikes on temporarily occupied territories. Will be able to launch strikes on temporarily occupied territories, but not deep into Russia, according to Pentagon Speaker Pat Ryder. This was to be expected, deeply disappointing. So F-16s will not be able to fire off barrages into Russian territory north of the border, say into Belgorod, but they can strike into Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk. Quote, our policy on long-range strikes has not changed. I think it's important to recognise here that we don't want to see unintended consequences and escalation that could turn this conflict into the broader conflict that goes beyond Ukraine. Exactly the same rationale they use for not allowing deep strikes in general into Belgorod, but disappointing there nonetheless. Anyway, that's not part of the geopolitics stuff. That was just came out after I did my last video. Right, we're going to start with France. Prime Minister Gabriel Attal submitted his government's resignation to the President of the Republic, Macron, who accepted it. However, Gabriel Attal will, quote, ensure with the members of the government the management of current affairs until the appointment of the new government. So he will run a kind of interim government until a new one is appointed. There are still, I believe, arguments going on between the different factions of each coalition, particularly the left-wing coalition, where Mélenchon was screaming the other day for an hour, by all accounts, at other people within the coalition, trying to sort themselves out into a cohesive unit. Sébastien Lecornu will remain Minister of the Armed Forces until the next government is formed. His future is unfortunately uncertain. That's a shame. He seems to have been doing a fairly decent job. Under the leadership of Lecornu, says French aid to Ukraine, as Minister of the Armed Forces, France has become the world's second largest arms exporter, and the United States will reach the threshold after the US and will reach a threshold of 2% of GDP devoted to defence. In terms of military aid to Ukraine, manufacturers such as KNDS France have switched to a war economy in order to be able to produce 78 guns in 2024 to meet Ukraine's operational needs. During his second visit to Kiev in the autumn of 2023, Lecornu was instrumental in initiating weapons co-production projects on Ukrainian territory. So that's what French aid to Ukraine says. I would still suggest that the French support of Ukraine has been more limited than I think I would like to see in terms of actual tangible equipment. They do probably help with stuff like intelligence, in terms of they're one of the few nations with military spy satellites, I think, along with, say, the US, UK maybe, but certainly the French do help. The French have always had an interesting relationship with NATO. They're a bit kind of independent. But anyway, I think most people would argue that in terms of material, they haven't quite stepped up to reach the rhetoric that Macron has been proposing. Now, Jordan Bardella, who is it was hoped by Rassemblement National that he would lead the government as the prime minister, but it's not looking like the coalition on the right have enough heft to do so. But he apparently yesterday reiterated his support for Ukraine. But there are some key points from his first speech to the EU Parliament in Strasbourg. He said the refusal to spend, actually it's supposed to be 0.25% of GDP on aid to Ukraine, a refusal to allow Ukraine to join NATO and the EU, a refusal to allow Ukrainian strikes into Russia, I presume with Western or French equipment, refusal to condemn Orban's visit to Moscow. So, he might give lip service to support for Ukraine, but he's just taken over leadership of the Patriots for Europe, which is a coalition group inside the European Parliament, founded by Viktor Orban. So you know where his sentiments lie. There's no doubt about that. So yeah, that's what's going on in France at the moment. The EU cannot legally deprive Hungary of the right to preside over the Council, the Vice President of the European Commission said. This is in answer to letters from European Parliament members who have been complaining about Hungary. They have the rotating presidency. The Hungarian presidency falls on a period when the EU Council will not make key decisions. Therefore, Orban will not be able to harm internal relations to the bloc. So that's quite lucky. Confidence in the Hungarian Prime Minister in the EU is almost zero, and European leaders are boycotting his policies. A new all-time high for Czech exports to Kyrgyzstan. This appears to be, Robin Brooks comes out with these graphs, and they always seem to be the same, whether it be Germany, the US, Czech Republic, whatever the country, you will see a spike after 2022 in terms of exports to Kyrgyzstan, because that's how they get exports into Russia, through the back door. Now, it's not the Czech Republic's fault per se. These are individual companies. That's what I keep saying. It is not a blame game. It's just very difficult to close the loopholes here. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to know this stuff goes to Russia, says Brooks, and never touches the ground in Kyrgyzstan. 2 years of war in Ukraine, 2 years of having one's cake and eating it too in the EU. Shame. Absolutely is a shame. Just, my goodness, how difficult it is to sew up those loopholes. Attention EU and UK. Russian state TV, says Anton Grishchenko, state TV channel, showed a map of nuclear strikes on European capitals. Mr. Popov said, quote, Britain is in the most vulnerable state. 3 missiles are enough for this civilization to collapse. Oh, that's nice. So that's really what the Russians think, isn't it? And, we don't do this on national television, night in, night out. The idea that half of our, or not even half, but a significant proportion of politicians, including those poised to take over in the US in November, if the elections go their way, more on that soon, the fact that they want this nation to be appeased, the fact that they want to force Ukraine to go to the negotiating table with a nation that is threatening to nuclear strike allies like UK is just bonkers. Vyacheslav Morozov, got there in the end, was a widely respected scholar of political science in Estonia's premier university when he was convicted of spying in Russia. His arrest came as a shock to some. To others, it was an illustration of a long-standing suspicion. Many countries that were previously under the sphere of influence of Russia still remain so to some extent, right? And this is the challenge that the Baltics, that Eastern European nations have in trying to throw off the shackles of the Soviet Union and the older Russian influence to travel towards a greater sense of independence and national identity of their own. There are a lot of people, like there are many in Ukraine, who, for some bizarre reason, think that Russia is a paragon of virtue and a paragon of political excellence, and so that's who they would rather side with. It just seems insane that you would basically prefer a dictatorship, but I guess money walks, doesn't it? Or does a lot of heavy lifting, that's for sure. Now, I wanted to show these yesterday. I am going to try and do this again. We'll see if it works, because I got copyright infringed on this, so I hope it doesn't happen if I just embed it on Twitter. But this is spot on from Adam Kidd. Absolutely spot on, and couldn't have put it better myself. That is who has been made the running mate of Donald Trump. That's who Donald Trump has selected. Not necessarily an easy choice, as in there are some claims that this was something that was very last minute still, in terms of Donald Trump deciding, and we'll come back to that idea in a second. Let's just go back to the idea of Trump being assassinated, that assassination attempt the other day. There is a lot of talk at the moment about this idea that the Secret Service ramped up security after intel came out of an Iranian plot to assassinate Trump. There's no known connection to the shooting at the moment. Now, I wonder whether there is, I don't know. You can come up with all sorts of theories as to why that information might come out. It could well be that Iran have decided to try and assassinate Trump. I don't think that it would be massively in Iran's favor to do so. especially as Trump would look to take the US in an isolationist direction. So there are all sorts of conspiracy theories that you can think as to whether that plot was real or not. And I guess we won't know for some time. But anyway, supposedly an Iranian plot to assassinate Trump. Now, this is Julia Davis from the Russian media monitor saying, meanwhile in Russia, Vladimir Solovyov, so one of the main propagandists, and his guests discussed the attempt on Trump's life, excitedly proclaiming that it assured his return to the White House and is a death blow to Ukrainians, who they say will soon march on Berlin along with Russians. And here, this other source says, if it makes the Kremlin happy, it certainly isn't good for Europe. Support Ukraine, arm Europe, and do all that you can to deny Putin's Russia its wildest wishes. If you see Russian propagandists on state TV saying, this is a guy we want, this is a guy we like, my initial reaction is that should be the guy we don't vote for. Whatever Russia wants, we should pretty much almost a priori want the opposite. Yeah, it doesn't take an awful lot of thought to realise that they want things that will undermine unity in the world that is pitted against Russia. The Bulwark, a conservative but anti-Trump media outlet, says, quote, Vance also earned plaudits from Sputnik. So Sputnik is the Russian propaganda network, for telling Tucker Carlson that Ukraine needed to be defunded for its own good. And I like how the Bulwark has got JD Vance brackets R Moscow, which means that's the way they Republican Moscows, and you might say D Connecticut, right? And it means you're a Democrat representing Connecticut. Well, JD Vance is a Republican representing the Moscow district. Fascinating there. And going back to what I was just talking about earlier, that actually the decision wasn't so clear-cut in Trump's mind. Interesting that such consistent pro-Russian voices banded together to back Vance. What happened here? So, quote from an Axios article, a secret lobbying campaign continued until yesterday morning. So this is on the 16th, going back to the morning of, I guess, when Vance was chosen, with Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson and tech investor David Sachs all calling Trump to try to lock in Vance. So Vance wasn't definitely going to be chosen. And the three people defending that, Elon Musk, Tucker Carlson and David Sachs, are the most anti-Ukraine people. In other words, the backbone of the upcoming Trump presidency, if he's voted in, appears to be, or the common thread amongst all these major people involved, with Musk presenting $45 million a month for the Trump campaign, is anti-Ukrainianism. This is deeply worrying. Like, that seems to be the commonality that's going on. It's not about these other, you can talk about border security, etc., but that's kind of a given. This is something that's over and above the usual rhetoric that discernibly connects these voices, and it freaks me out. Liz Cheney, the Republican super conservative a lawmaker who was called Rhino, Republican name only, that yet when you look at her voting record, she is super Republican. It's only that she called Trump out, and you get this cult of personality these days. Well, she said JD Vance has pledged he would do what Mike Pence wouldn't, which is to overturn an election and illegally seize power. He says the president can ignore the rulings of our courts. He would capitulate to Russia and sacrifice the freedom of our allies in Ukraine. The Trump GOP is no longer the party of Lincoln, Reagan, or the Constitution. She's referring back to February the 5th. Yesterday, JD Vance claimed that Trump would defy rulings of the Supreme Court as president. Vance also admitted he would have done what Vice President Pence refused to do on January the 6th and helped Trump illegally seize power. That's tyranny. Neither Trump nor Vance are fit to serve, or is fit to serve. So, you know what she thinks about that, and it's a real shame. So let's actually look at something that pertains more directly to Ukraine. By referring to this excerpt from Ukraine the Latest, the Daily Telegraph podcast that talked about JD Vance's Ohio state and the actually quite an important community of Ukrainians, a diaspora community that lives there.
Much, Tony, for joining us. Let's now go to our colleague, Cara McGugan, host of the award-winning Bed of Lies podcast series on The Telegraph. Cara, we want to talk to you a little bit because you've spent some time reporting on J.D. Vance in Ohio. Can you take us back 2 years ago, tell us what you were doing in the US and why you were there?
Yes, thank you, David. Nice to come on for the first time. So a couple of years ago, I was in the US doing the Stern Bryan Fellowship at the Washington Post, and I was on the midterm campaign trail, and I spent quite a lot of time in Ohio. I was back and forth, and both trips I was covering the Senate race when J.D. Vance won. The first story I did, though, my first piece of the Washington Post, was actually about Ukrainian voters in Ohio, because this was a community who, for the first time ever, was saying that they would turn against the Republicans. They had voted from Reagan through to Trump. They had voted Republican, but they were grappling with the issue that Vance had come out and said he didn't care what happened in Ukraine. He had then rode back and said he wanted the Ukrainians to be successful, but he said he would turn off the money spigot, all those things that we've heard Tony just talking about now. But it was a really personal issue that people were grappling with in Ohio for that Senate race 2 years ago.
And what did you make of him as a person and as a politician? You got quite close.
Yes, so he's clearly quite a slick man, very well turned out, very confident, a good speaker. But he wasn't necessarily someone that was willing to go out and speak to anyone. Compared to his opponent, who I managed to get on the phone, who I managed to speak to at events, J.D. Vance was very much keeping himself away from the media. He's got that kind of MAGA style critique of the media in his speeches. And so I was told, come to this clam bake and J.D. he'll give you a couple of minutes to talk about the Ukrainian community for this story. And I went along to this clam bake in a field in Ohio. It's essentially a barbecue, but a lot of clams, which I don't know where they get them from because it's not near the sea. But a big field, marquee, JD gives his splashy speech, a lot of cheering, and then a big queue of people lining up to speak to him afterwards, Republican Party members getting selfies. And then JD just makes to leave. And I was like, wait, I've sat through 2 hours of this to get a couple of minutes with you. I'm only looking at this quite specific story. And I end up chasing him to his car saying, excuse me, will you talk to me? And then he just slammed the car door in my face. And I was left looking like a lemon with his press person who was like, yeah, he's not going to be commenting for this story. And then they gave me the number of someone else to speak to instead in the Republican Party.
And just going back to his relationship then with his Ukrainian American constituents, how did that story play out during the election? And did you see much evidence of flexibility from his side?
No, he didn't really express any empathy for that community in Ohio. So I think people stuck by their opinion that he was not someone they would be voting for. And just to have some of those stories, because obviously it's far away from Ukraine, but the links ran really deep. There was someone who'd taken in 10 relatives from Ukraine, and they were all living in his house on top of one another. There was people, they were on the phone to relatives back in Ukraine every day. One person's best friend was texting her daily, and then suddenly contact just stopped. There's credit union for the Ukrainian community, and they all got sent home the day the war started. Like, it's a community that it runs deep, and it's their nationality as well. So it's really emotional for them. And what was quite stark was that the Republican and Democrat politicians going back have been on their side. So there's this kind of Ukrainian Day parade every day in this community in Ohio near Cleveland. And the senator who was currently Republican had gone along every year. He had been one of the first senators to go to Ukraine after the war started. Rob Portman, I think that's right. And he was the chair of the Senate Committee on Ukraine, but his successor, J.D. Vance, was of a completely different opinion. It had always been an issue that parties came together on in Ohio. And that is where we can see what Tony said, the sort of steer away within that community.
Cara, is there anything we haven't said about your report?
It really interesting there that J.D. Vance, seen by Ukrainians who had died in the war, Republicans, is seen as clearly not a supporter of Ukraine in any way, shape or form, and they've turned away from him, and that's I think deeply hurtful for them. Nikki Haley, who's very much pro-Ukraine, has now come out at the RNC convention, the Republican convention, and just gone back on basically everything she said on the campaign trail against Trump, and she's turned the party line. I understand why she's doing this. She's trying to lay out her own future politically speaking. She's thinking about a 2029 run here. We have 4 more years of Biden, or 2028. We have 4 more years of Biden or a single day of Harris. Our country will be badly worse off. For the sake of our nation, we have to go with Donald Trump, she says. As Michael Weiss says, she believes none of this. But there you go. Okay, I'm the bad guy, right? I'm the bad guy. So in recent weeks, Haley has repeatedly called Trump unhinged, accused him of cozying up to Russian President Vladimir Putin, criticised him for confusing her with former Speaker Nancy Pelosi, and declared him not qualified to serve as president, among other criticisms. And that went on and on. She said an awful lot of content against Trump, all of it correct, I would argue. And now she's just going right back on that because, of course, it is politically convenient for her so to do. Now, former British Prime Minister, who's a staunch supporter of Ukraine, Boris Johnson, met with Trump. Interestingly, I saw the picture of him give a talk in a breakout session. All these chairs, there's only about 20 of them filled, like hardly anyone listening to Boris Johnson. It's quite incredible. But anyway, former Prime Minister Bojo met with Trump and discussed Ukraine with him. He noted, that he believes Trump will be strong and decisive in supporting the country and its democracy, as Noel reports then, for whatever it's worth. In other words, yeah, okay, really believe that's the case. Now, apparently Trump, it depends on who you read at the moment. So Jane Kiev, citing the Kiev Independent here, we're forcing everyone away, Trump says, on Russia sanctions. So this idea that actually, and I said this yesterday, Trump will, if he gets in, will stop the sanctions against Russia, because you can bet there will be people like Elon Musk who needs those natural resources to come his way. There will be people pressuring Trump to pull away from those sanctions. And of course, if you do that, then the whole economic war against Russia just falls apart, and Russia is able to just prosecute its war with wild abandon. You can worry about the military situation, but I said yesterday that this is arguably more serious. And if he suddenly gets the Treasury, the US Treasury, to undo all of its hard work, then it's all been a big waste of time. And it's looking like he could well do that. Other people, so here, Nexta reports duties on imports from China, no TikTok bans and migration control. Trump spoke about the measures he will take if he wins the election. He gave an interview to Bloomberg in which he said he shared his plans in case he becomes a new president. Trump wants to achieve lower prices for consumer goods by increasing oil and gas production. By the way, under Biden, the US is drilling more oil than it ever has done in its entire existence, and than any other country in the history of the earth. So when Trump comes out and says drill, 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 the US is doing a phenomenal amount of drilling and extraction. And it's just a complete lie that they're not. It all comes down to the kind of a pipeline, Keystone Pipeline and whatnot. But realistically, the US are producing an awful lot of hydrocarbons, kind of against their green intentions. But anyway, Trump wants to achieve lower prices for consumer goods by increasing oil and gas production, as well as guarantee the residents of the country an increase in wages by controlling migration. In addition, Trump said he is cool about sanctions against Russia. So this is going slightly against what Kiev Independent was reporting, and does not, although that's not exactly, I'm cool about sanctions. My bet is that he will reverse sanctions. He does not approve of the TikTok ban in the US, which is something that during his presidency he was striving to get. And then as soon as the Democrats said, yeah, we're going to do that, he was against it. And he got lobbied by the Chinese businessman as part of the club of, the club of whoever, anyway, that's involved with TikTok, lobbied him. And then next day he's like, yeah, no, TikTok's all right. Yep, really? At the same time, he intends to raise barrier duties on imports from China and impose a 10% tariff on imports of goods from other countries. Of course, that is going to be massively inflationary, hugely inflationary. Both, getting low-paid migrants and shipping them back off to whatever country and whacking tariffs on stuff, double inflationary. As Bloomberg Businessweek notes themselves, economists are skeptical of Trump's proposed measures, predicting that instead of the desired effect, they will stimulate the already problematic growth of inflation, as well as provoke higher taxes for Americans themselves. It's absolutely no doubt that happened. So I think Trump's positions, not only are they not fiscally conservative and small government, they are actually more centralized planning. It's really odd. These are this is protectionism, which is, you can argue that isolationism is some kind of nationalist thing, which it is. It's like, yeah, America first, but actually you have to then be doing an awful lot of strategic planning, and it starts looking like left-wing populism. But of course, they won't want to admit that. But it will look like economic left-wing populism. It's a real mix of crazy stuff. There's no way. I find it funny, hilarious, that people call Trump critics within the GOP rhinos, Republican name only. I would argue that's exactly what Trump is. Anyway, new polls show that Harris is outperforming Biden in Virginia and Pennsylvania. So this could add grist to the mill for people who are arguing that Harris should replace Biden. I think she should. But here's the thing, and I've been meaning to say this loads. I have said it to you before, but I've been forgetting to repeat it, which is there will be an October surprise, right, before November. And that October surprise, we know 100% that there is a recording out there of Trump calling back when he was at The Apprentice, using the N-word for a person of color, and this is a recording that's been confirmed, that's out there. And the idea is that that's going to be released as an October surprise. So I wonder whether Biden is not only holding on because the people around him don't want to lose their jobs, not only because of his pride and all these other things, but I reckon he's got a few things in his pocket that he's hoping will just blow the race out the water for the Republicans. Now, I'm not sure it will, but it could also do so if that video or that recording exists, and suddenly you get a big backlash of black and brown voters against the Republicans, against Trump more particularly, then you could get a reversal of fortunes. Now, would that be enough? Is that too risky to just rely on something like that? I don't know. It's also interesting that a released recording has now come out of the third-party candidate, RFK Jr., in which he talks about vaccines and claims that we will win. So in other words, RFK Jr. is on Trump's side. He is acting to steal votes away from Biden. It's not very high volume, so I won't play it to you. But anyway, you can go find it out. It's variously out there. But the idea that we will win, and that's is it released by his son, this recording? It just goes to show that actually these guys are working in cahoots to get Trump in, and the expectation could be that RFK Jr. gets a position in that Trump administration. And we're just going to talk, and I'm going to put this to bed because I think, oddly, I'm wondering whether the assassination attempt might blow over a little sooner than you would otherwise expect it to. Might not in your dyed-in-the-wool Republican electorate, but because the shooter is looking like he's not clearly a Democrat activist. In fact, there's some analysis that's come out from data collection from before 2016 election that puts people's gun ownership, being hunters, all these kind of ideas, and then shows that actually the shooter's family was in the top 20 people in that whole locality who were prime for GOP narrative and propaganda and whatnot. So that they had already kind of, if you like, profiled that household to be, very much in the GOP camp. And now we're hearing, as I said yesterday, that outside the doors were Trump, outside the house were Trump placards, and the shooter himself was conservative. That was a registered Republican and sided with conservative issues at school and had friends with MAGA hats and all of these things that you build up a picture of the shooting and think, yeah, it's not quite what the GOP people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and even JD Vance wanted initially. They wanted this to be a Biden what did it, and it's now turning out not to be the case. You're starting to see people go a little bit quieter on this issue because it's more complex. Oh, who knew it would be a disturbed individual with some issues, much more likely than an activist, a Democrat left-leaning activist who suddenly also particularly likes guns and so on and so forth. So anyway, it then becomes this talk about whether we're going to go into a period of less rhetoric and that will Trump be this unifier? And the idea coming out from a lot of Republican media sources and Republican lawmakers themselves is that actually this was all a result of Democratic rhetoric that was over the top. But as many analysts are pointing out, the rhetoric is completely one-sided, and it's one-sided on the other side. This is Pondering Politics giving his tuppence.
But for too long, Donald Trump has been graded on an absurd curve. Another just random example. Last year, Donald Trump retruthed the address or the alleged address of President Obama's DC home. And then later, days later, a gunman, a Trump loyal gunman who saw the address, retruthed it. We know there's a direct connection between Trump sharing the address. That guy was active on Truth Social, retruthed it as well, and then was arrested outside of President Obama's home. Prosecutors, man went near Obama's home after Trump posted alleged address. Taylor Toronto, 37. We got these losers surrounded. See you in hell, Podestas and Obamas. And then he began live streaming from his van on his YouTube channel. Okay. Insane, unhinged stuff. And again, if we went through the many examples of Donald Trump's violent rhetoric or his associations with violence compared to President Biden and the Democrats, we'd be there all damn day. We'd be here.
And this is a really good section. Sorry, I'm just going to forward it on.
Makes
with anyone.
Here
there
it
was
is.
A registered but
put on a masterclass performance.
I just saw your interview with Ben Shapiro where it was nothing but whataboutism, and I'm not here to BS your audience or gaslight anyone. There was a registered Republican, a white male, who tried to assassinate Donald Trump. Unfortunately, also there was a person who was killed, a father, and there were two people who were critically injured. And Donald Trump, ever since he descended the escalators 9 years ago and ascended to power for 9 years, has stoked the ultra-violence. I remember at his protest, he used to openly say, knock the crap out of him, I'll pay for your legal bills. This is the same people who's called the press, people like us, people like you, Pierre's enemy of the people. And as such, for the past 9 years, multiple cases where his followers have tried to commit violence against law enforcement, the press, poll workers. This is the same man who said, as of this campaign, I want to be dictator for a day. Last week, he praised the January 6th violent insurrectionists, called them hostages. He incited a violent insurrection. When those insurrectionists came to the Capitol with violence, some of them came to assassinate Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence, his former vice president. You know what he said? Yeah, they're onto something. He encouraged them to kill Mike Pence, his former vice president. 2 weeks ago, Donald Trump posted that he wants televised military tribunals for Liz Cheney, who used to be the number 3 Republican, and also the head of Heritage Foundation, who has released Trump's Project 2025 2 weeks ago, Pierce, said that we're in the process of a second American revolution, and it will be bloodless unless the left allows it to be. This is what we're dealing with. It is a toxic environment which has been stoked by Trump's embrace of the ultraviolence and violent rhetoric. And yesterday, Nancy Pelosi, her husband Paul Pelosi, folks, for those who don't know, another far-right nut, tried to assassinate her. He opened the door. He took a hammer to her head. He survived an assassination attempt. Do you know what MAGA and Trump did? They mocked him, ridiculed him, promoted conspiracy theories, and then Trump joked about it with the public. Nancy Pelosi yesterday, regardless of what you think about their politics, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and President Biden wished Trump well. They wished peace. They de-escalated the situation. And all of a sudden, we have whataboutism from the right wing. And I want to say one last thing about the right wing. Mitt Romney was the 2012 Republican presidential candidate. Do you know what Mitt Romney said? Openly admitted, he has to pay $5,000 a month for security for his family. He said Republicans in office right now are also terrified for their life. You know who they're terrified from? MAGA Republicans.
And it's just a really good point. I mean, it is abundantly obvious to me that the rhetoric has been far, far, far more damaging from the right, from people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, J.D. Vance, Matt Gaetz, Trump himself. And indeed, I find this utterly disgusting. So Donald Trump Jr., like the man, is a pretty old man, clubbed on the head with a hammer in an attempt to assassinate Nancy Pelosi, and Donald Trump Jr. says, "I've got my Paul Pelosi Halloween costume ready." That's absolutely disgusting. It's disgusting. And at a rally, Trump joked about this twice, not about that gag, but about Paul Pelosi. Joked about him having just been clubbed over the head in an attempted assassination, and he's now saying he's going to be the unifier. He has no ability to do that. In fact, an absolutely fascinating piece is a really big article in New York Times is Donald Trump has never sounded like this before. So he's talking about being the unifier, and this goes into look at the language he's used over time. Our cities are choking to death, our states are dying, and frankly, our country is dying. We're getting to a stage of rhetoric, and we have been before, and I think he's going to get there very soon again. That is far more than we've seen previously. This has been an amazing period of time, said Trump in one rally. It's been amazing for me from an educational standpoint, and I think honestly we've done something that almost nobody thought could be done. I'm very proud of it. I just want to leave you with this: I'm a unifier, right? So that's his unifier rhetoric, but then nothing else points towards him being a unifier. With you at my side, and you've been at my side from the beginning, we will demolish the deep state. We're going to expel those horrible warmongers from our government. They want to fight everybody. They want to kill people all over the place. In other words, those who are supporting Ukraine. Places you've never heard of before, places that want to be left alone. We'll drive out the globalists. We'll cast out the communist, Marxist, fascists. We'll throw off the sick political class that hates our country. We'll rout the fake news media until they become real. We will evict Joe Biden from the White House, and we will finish a job that has started better than anybody has ever started before. So on and so forth. Our threat is from within. He ends. But as the article says, no major American presidential candidate has talked like this. Not Richard Nixon, not George Wallace, not even Trump himself. Previously, right before November 2020, his speeches, for all their boundary crossings, stopped short of the language of vermin and enemies within. When I asked the political historian Federico Finkelstein what he made of this speech, he replied bluntly, "This is how fascists campaign." And then the article goes on to look at dictatorships and fascism and how they construct their speeches. And then basically, Trump speeches are fascistic. And here's another example. When they started playing with your elections and trying to arrest their political opponent, I can do that too, Trump said. If I win, which I hope we do because we're not going to have a country, but if I win, I could then say, I don't know, this Democrat's doing great. I don't like the poll numbers. Attorney General, come down, arrest that guy, will you please? Give him a subpoena, indict him. And that's the end of him. And of course, we're hearing from Project 2025 and from J.D. Vance himself that they'd like to clear out 20,000 people, get rid of them and put loyalists in instead, and completely purge the government so that it basically looks like a cultish dictatorship. But yeah, in these movements, you have to take the moral high ground first. This is Steve Bannon, who remains in Trump's orbit and received a presidential pardon from him. Pardon those that are close to you. Even Biden wasn't going to do that with his son. And serves as a sort of in-house philosopher strategist for MAGA on his War Room podcast. The aim of Trump's early campaign speeches, he explained, was, quote, to reinforce to his core followers, we know what happened, we're united, I've got it, I'm all in, and put the enemy, his rivals, and antagonists in the party on notice. Bannon pointed me to a speech Trump gave to a CPAC conference in 2023, shortly before the first of his indictments. In 2016, Trump told the audience, which included Jair Bolsonaro, the president from Brazil at the time. It wasn't a dictator, but he wanted to be. In 2016, I declared, I am your voice. Today, I am your warrior. I am your justice. And for those who have been wronged and betrayed, I am your retribution. He repeated it for emphasis. I am your retribution. Bannon said, you're not selling Morning in America from Mar-a-Lago. You need a different tempo. He needed to reiterate to his followers, this is effing revenge. It's all about revenge, and that's not unifying. It's about, this is what you've done, and we're going to take you down. together we'll make America powerful again. We will make America wealthy again. We'll make America strong again. It's interesting what he puts first. Power and wealth are the two things he puts first. That tells you everything. That's what's important to Trump. Powerful again, wealthy again, strong again, proud again, safe again, make America great again. And of course, we now know that the stats are looking, actually, I need to just change this, are looking pretty good for the US in terms of crime.
Look at what has happened with the homicide rate. In 2020, when, Donald Trump was president, he ushered in, under his presidency, the largest ever one-year jump, spiking 30%. By 2023, the homicide rate had tumbled 19% to 5.3 homicides per 100,000 people. New data from the FBI shows the rate continues to drop off dramatically, down another 26% in the first quarter of 2024 from the same time period last year. Look at what has happened with the homicide.
So actually, you need to compound those percentages, but it's not just about a COVID spike and this and that. That actually, crime rates, serious crime rates, are definitely going down. Just that there's so much in this huge article, but this one pertains to Ukraine, right? And so that's why I'm going to read this. So a quote from a woman at one of these rallies, Laken Riley, tragic story. Broussard was saying, let's talk about that and how this hit home, not just because this was a beautiful American college student, but also right there in your backyard here in Georgia. It's very concerning with us who have kids and grandkids. The families and friends that's got younger kids, said the woman with a sign, a 56-year-old rental property manager from LEJ, Georgia, named Deanna Foley. It's tragic. It's embarrassing that Joe Biden's not even acknowledging her. Absolutely, Broussard said. It's disgusting. When Broussard moved on, I asked the woman how they had heard about Riley's murder. Fox News, Foley replied. That's the only news I watch. Illegal immigration, she told me, was the most important issue for her in the election. Quote, I'm very concerned, with the human trafficking, child trafficking, and the crime that goes along with it, fueled by illegal aliens and cartels, she said. And then there were the tens of thousands of children who had gone missing in Ukraine since the Russian invasion, she added. That's just nothing but a human trafficking thing right there. Many children, perhaps thousands, were indeed abducted from Ukraine by Russian soldiers in the early days of the war. Journalistic and legal investigations have found that many are being held in Russia, where they are being subjected to re-education and used occasionally for propaganda purposes. But this did not seem to be what Foley was talking about. Quote, what do you think is happening to all those kids, I asked. Paedophiles, Foley replied. The Illuminati. Definitely pedos, her friend Tina Murray interjected. Pedophiles, Foley said again. Hunter Biden, Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton. Hollywood, Murray said. This sounded like a QAnon theory of the world in which practically any event could be explained and connected to a great liberal child trafficking conspiracy. When I mentioned QAnon, Foley nodded. I like Q, she said. They give people hope in very sad and low times. You've got to use your discernment online, Foley went on, but you don't use your discernment on the Democrats because, they're just, she paused looking for the word, against America. So you just think all the stuff about them is true that you see out there, I asked. On the Democrats? Yeah. Absolutely. It's worse than I could ever dream of. And so you get this information space that is not only being filled, you get these speeches that fill the listener with this invective and rhetoric and us and them mentality. Then you're watching Fox News and then you're watching QAnon online and you're just building up this idea that all Democrats are pedophiles that are stealing Ukrainian children. So what is going on? And anyway, you listen to this from Trump. So what Joe Biden has done on our border is a crime against humanity and the people of this nation, for which he will never be forgiven. I will stop this invasion. I'm going to do it. I will stop the killing. I will stop the bloodshed. I don't know what he's talking about. I will end the agony of our people, the plunder of our cities, the sacking of our towns, the violation of our citizens, and the conquest of our country. They're conquering our country. These people are conquering our country. Just incredibly divisive rhetoric there that is just ostensibly not true as well. While you might have some issues with immigration, the idea that they are sacking towns and conquering the country and raping you're violating your citizens and plundering cities is absolute nonsense, and it's dangerous. And if you're the one complaining about the rhetoric from Biden, therefore it's Biden's fault that Trump got shot, then you're just not reading the data correctly here. You're just not accurate in your appraisal. And in fact, this kind of both sidesism is a problem. So I'll finish on this. This is galling. Media accounts are noting that both Trump and Democrats are attacking the other as a grave threat to democracy. But Dems base this on what Trump and his allies say in their own words, whereas Trump makes shit up. Media isn't making this clear. Some media figures are eager to portray Trump as a uniter after the shooting. Axios is pushing this hard, but Trump just unleashed a rant that wrecks the storyline, calling January the 6th a hoax and depicting our justice system as corrupt to its core. Trump isn't backing off this vow to pardon January the 6thers and says January the 6th was just fine. This is incompatible with being a uniter. It embodies the ideas that MAGA is not subject to the law, that the rest of us are, and that invalidating the votes of millions is good. Republicans are using the shooting to shut down talk about the threat Trump poses to democracy. Even worse, Trump is now pushing the idea that moving past January the 6th, avoiding all crimes associated with it, is the true root of national unity and healing. Each side attacks the other as a threat to democracy, but only Democrats are being faithful to reality here. Trump does pose a foundational threat to Republican governance. MAGA is the only major faction in the US life that valorizes political violence. No calling Trump a uniter until he renounces a vow to pardon the January the 6ers, commits not to prosecuting foes, stops smearing law enforcement as inherently corrupt, and tells allies to stop treating any loss as illegitimate in advance. And that's just the start. Absolutely agree with this. Like, this is just the both sides of Dems are just as bad as Republicans is empirically false. And don't even get me started on like Project 2025, the threat that is to American governance, and the fact that Trump has immunity given to him by Justice Thomas, who should have been recused from that ruling anyway because of his wife's dealings. And indeed, as this image now comes out and shows, the Virginia L. Thomas, so Ginny Thomas, Clarence Thomas's wife, former director, executive branch relations for the Heritage Foundation. So there you go. It all makes sense. You've got these Supreme Courts compromised by Heritage Foundation, compromised by all sorts. Clarence Thomas, her husband, went to see Putin back some time ago and has received gifts he didn't declare from nefarious other state entities, is making judgments concerning Trump. And you've got Heritage Foundation making Project 2025 that's truly scary and is a blueprint for Trump's presidency. And it's all linked and it's all insanely scary. And the only hope, I think, for Democrats is one, a change of candidate, I think, to energize the electorate to vote for something rather than just against, say, Project 2025, and also an October surprise that could come out and ruin things for Trump. Anyway, I know that's a lot of US politics talk, and I know I've done an awful lot of that recently, but it is all to do with this rhetoric that's going on that I think is being falsely reported. And I think it's incumbent upon me to talk about that, and also as it pertains to Ukraine, because whoever gets in, like, is to me, I'm speaking about this so much because Trump gets in November, Ukraine is screwed. Biden gets in November, Ukraine have a chance. That's, Biden's weak on, don't get me wrong, like Sullivan at the moment needs a clip round the ear, quite frankly, and that anti-escalation rhetoric needs to be thrown out the door right now. Biden is weak on Ukraine, but I'd take a weak, morally correct stance, politically correct stance, than a strong, woefully inadequate stance, morally and politically speaking. Anyway, that's enough from me. Take care, guys. Speak soon.